I just want to, I hope everyone can hear. We did a little audio test, so hopefully that's good. We know we've got more people joining, but I think that's great. We've had such an interest in this event this morning. I hope everyone's feeling well. My name is Patricia Durr. I'm the Chief Executive of ECPAT UK, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this event with our partners for this project, World Vision Vietnam. I'm your chair, but I'm new to this webinar format, so bear with me if I mess up. And it feels a bit odd that I can't see everyone, but hopefully I won't end up kicking you all off at some point. There is a Q&A function at the bottom of the screen, so you can put your questions to all of our panelists, and we'll have some time for that at the end. And also we're using a hashtag for today's event. So if any of you are on Twitter or other social media, you can use hashtag your voice, your right. I want to say a really big thank you to the young people involved in our focus groups for this project, who shared their expertise so generously and really helped us to shape the direction of the project. And also to our steering group members who provided much needed feedback and support, and again gave very generously of their time and expertise. We've got Patricia and Chung on the panel who were part of that steering group, and also we've got a number of others who are with us today as well. This launch is all about helping Vietnamese people in migration to or in the UK to understand the risks of trafficking, exploitation, and importantly, to understand their rights. The focus is on the criminal justice system, and my colleague Phil will set out more about why that focus in his presentation. But I just wanted to flag two contextual matters which highlight its importance, I think, right now. The first one is the ruling last month in the European Court of Human Rights in the case of VCL and AN versus the United Kingdom, where the judge ruled that the UK government had failed to protect victims of child trafficking and breached 2 articles of the European Convention on Human Rights. The court ordered the government to pay compensation to the 2 Vietnamese young people involved, and they had been convicted of crimes as children, despite signs they'd been trafficked and exploited on cannabis farms. Also today, we're waiting on more details about Home Office plans for reform of modern slavery legislation. This was reported over the weekend here in the UK, with claims that there's wide-scale abuse of the national referral mechanism for the purposes of criminal defence. Given we all know how commonly victims are criminalised for their own exploitation and how important early identification and prevention is, today's launch seems very timely. I should have said at the top of the meeting, good afternoon also, because obviously we've got friends from Vietnam with us. I apologise, so morning here, afternoon there, and I'm going to invite Thu Ha from World Vision Vietnam now to say a little bit more about the project. You need to, sorry Thu Ha, you need to unmute. It's the classic Zoom problem.
Okay,
there you are.
Okay. Okay. Sorry. So on behalf of World Vision International in Vietnam, it is my pleasure to join ECPAT today this morning to launch the strategic information for Vietnamese people in the UK. And this is an intervention of a program called Tackling Modern Slavery from Vietnam, funded by the UK Home Office. And as you know, globally, and despite much of the good work to date, it is true that human trafficking and modern slavery continues to be one of the largest and most criminal industries. So this program is to end slavery through preventing individuals becoming victims of trafficking, increase access to justice and prosecution of traffickers, while protecting victims through direct assistance and reintegration support in Vietnam. So throughout our project, we have a baseline survey conducted, and also with the conducted by World Vision International in Vietnam, and also the latest research conducted by IOM Vietnam shows that Vietnamese citizens who have been identified as victims of trafficking have often begun their, migration to the UK with rational decision making, but based on limited and unreliable information about cost, length, dangers, or legal requirements, alternatives, and all the situation en route to the UK or even in the UK. So once their journey begins, their situation becomes progressively more precarious, and individuals facing new and rapidly changing vulnerabilities. So research commissioned by the British government shows that there remain a lack of understanding among at-risk peoples on how to report to the authorities, and limited awareness among those tasked with assigning victims of trafficking and also potential victims of human trafficking. So besides language barriers to victim of identification between British social workers and Vietnamese PVOT, that means potential victims of trafficking in the UK, also prevent the at-risk groups to get access to support services and report cases timely and when they are at risk situation. So that's the reason why World Vision International in Vietnam partners with ECPAT to develop the strategic information for Vietnamese people to and in the way to the UK, so that we can have to facilitate the prompt access to support of the Vietnamese people to available services in the UK and also in Vietnam. So as a result, we have this strategic information, and today for the launch of this strategic information, with the design that Vietnamese people en route to the UK or in the UK are informed to reach necessary services and support. So I am really confident that with this strategic information that this will be a valuable sources for Vietnamese people affected or at risk of trafficking. So I wish today's launch to be a great success.
Thank you so much, Thu-ha. It's been really great working with you on this project. So I've seen the video already, and I'm really excited to see it.
Yeah, that's great.
Thank you so much. We're now going to invite Dr. Patricia Hines, who's a reader in forced migration at the University of Bedfordshire, to talk to us about vulnerabilities and Vietnamese people in migration. So I'm going to mute. Over to you, Patricia. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can you see my screen? Yeah, okay. There's thumbs up, I can see. That's fantastic, and thank you, Thu-ha. I think it's lovely to hear our research reflected back at us. It was very pleasurable to hear you talking about the research we did with IOM a few years ago. Fantastic. Thank you also to ECPAT and everybody at ECPAT for letting me speak today. I'm not going to be able to cover every aspect or every structural aspect of what makes people vulnerable to human trafficking from Vietnam, but I would like to just sort of touch on some of the conversations we had with people from Vietnam to shine a light on some of their experiences. And as Thu-ha has already said, journeys do tend to begin with very rational decision making by individuals and their families, with actual examples of payment for employment being discussed. And as you can see from this one quote from a key informant, the figures presented can be part of this issue. This example of labour exploitation, for example, or something that became labour exploitation, began with discussions around the different levels of income within Vietnam and within the UK. And sometimes there are opportunities for that, there's different levels of income to be enhanced somewhat, shall we say, before people travel. But some people do mortgage their land or sell their assets before they travel. As Nam had outlined, this process of borrowing and raising money relates directly to debt. And what Nam said about this was that the broker had approached his house, asked him to borrow money for the deposit, and after that he'd started to collect the whole expense. They lent him some money, but they were all the brokers or facilitators or agents, and he borrowed money and he came back to collect that money. So he mortgaged his documents and he'd used his land use certificate, and had been told directly that the wage he sent home would cut directly into that debt. However, there can be unexpected dangers and costs and situations en route, which do mean that people face violence, abuse and exploitation on the journey. As you can see here, Nam suggested that this knowledge does not always stop people from traveling in the first instance. He said he feared hardships, but he would still go even if he would die. He had to work to pay off the debt. He didn't fear hardships, but he did fear debt itself. And these situations can be incredibly dangerous. As Tran, one of the people we spoke to in the UK, suggested, he had tried to reach the UK several times by clinging onto the chassis of a lorry after being told this was the only way he was able to pay off the debt he owed. That attempt failed. The second attempt was in a refrigerated lorry, that failed too. And altogether he made 10 attempts to reach the UK, all of which were really dangerous and really life-threatening. We also found that people were sometimes literally being kept in the dark about the locations en route, but also quite literally being kept in the dark in basements on occasions. As we can see from this first quote here, Quang outlined how he went through the forest routes, knowing that he had arrived in France when he got out of the forest. But he didn't know which countries he'd walked through or been through. And in France, there were people of the Brokers Network who then took him to the UK. And as Hui suggested, he traveled to Russia, then in Russia, he had to walk for several months. They asked him to walk from Russia to Germany. That is a very, very long way. So he walked to Germany on foot. And then this last quote from Quang here, they kept me for about 3 months in Germany. And then they took him to France, and they kept him in a basement in Germany and in France. So, you know, being literally kept in the dark, but also being kept in the dark about the time it would take to reach the UK or the levels of debt remaining. So as Hoa spoke here, the journey took him about 2 years. He had to travel in lots of different ways and stay in different types of accommodation, but he also suffered from abuse, torture, being beaten up, lied to by the agents. And in terms of the debt remaining, Fang commented to us that he had worked for more than 3 years, but he'd only paid off half the debt. There was something wrong. They just informed me, keep on working and I'll tell you when you've paid off your debt. And I think sometimes there are false promises around the type of employment people will undertake once they get to the UK, and then the realities of life in the UK. People might be forced into very unhealthy and unpleasant work, which we heard about from Patricia just this morning. And as Thang mentioned here, you know, people told me the UK was like a heaven, but it didn't turn out that way. And as Nam outlined, with my economic situation, I will still go again, even though I know I will risk my life. But the reality is harsh. The reality, he's talking about the UK here, the reality in the UK was far different from what people were dreaming of. Language can also be a bit of a barrier here, in terms of the inability to speak English can affect a person's safety in the UK. And it's sometimes used to link to a threat of being caught. As you can see here, Nam spoke about, he didn't want to go out onto the streets without knowing the language. And when I asked them why they just kept us in the house, not doing any nails, so working in the nail bar, they didn't even allow me to go out. They threatened me that I would get caught if I went outside, so I didn't dare. So he just stayed in the house. And what a few of our respondents spoke about was that you end up being in a situation where you have no support, and you don't know if there's anybody that you can really turn to. So identification in all of this is absolutely key. But I think knowledge about rights and entitlements can really help. And this is where the resources from ECPAT are going to be an essential part of this. Knowing who can help is really important. Knowledge of the processes, the criminal justice process, the immigration process, social care processes, all incredibly important, but very confusing and often isolating and frightening. So knowledge and rights about rights and entitlement once in the UK can be incredibly helpful. And I think these resources today will be a huge part of that. Thank you, that's everything.
Thanks so much, Patricia.
Pleasure.
Thank you for reminding us why we're here and the awful, horrible examples of exploitation and the experiences that the people you spoke to were able to share with you is just really important for us to hold on to.
Thank you.
I'm gonna ask if I'm going to hand over to Dr. Chung Pham of Locate Missing People, who's a UK and Vietnamese based educator and researcher. Can I hand it over to you, Chung?
Yeah, can you hear me now? Sorry. Hi, thank you for having me here. It has been a privilege to be part of the steering group and to be here again today. There isn't enough time for me to introduce about myself today, so you can further find out about me via our website on Locate or connect with us on LinkedIn. As per ECPAT's specific request, I will be sharing with you my observations of some challenges that the Vietnamese national face when they go through the criminal justice system in the UK. Challenges observed are many, from like what I observed in the last 5 years working in this field. But today I just want to run through 3 main things that I have observed. One is the NIM, the National Referral Mechanism. 2 is the interpreting issues, and 3 is resettlement. National Referral Mechanism. Since we have a number of professionals sitting at the other end in Vietnam, such as the World Vision Vietnam and Blue Dragon and a few others, I just want to quickly explain in the simplest way. NIM is a platform to identify or to verify whether or not a person is the victim of modern slavery, including human trafficking, so help can be allocated for them. Several Vietnamese nationals in the criminal justice system in the UK are related to trafficking or labor exploitation, so they are often referred to the NIM when they are in the criminal justice system. And NIM decisions will guide the CPS, the Crown Prosecution Services, whether or not a criminal case against the defendant should be dropped or should be proceeded to a trial if no guilty plea is entered. And from my observation here, what I capture with the NIM system for the Vietnamese in the criminal justice system, what it looks like. So the NIM decisions are taking a long time, and within the criminal justice system, this causes issues like lengthening the custody time. Bail is often not applicable to the Vietnamese national due to their immigration status, illegal and undocumented, with no fixed address. So court cases keep being adjourned as they need to wait for the NIM report to be completed, hence extension for the custody time is applied and granted over again and again. Many cases ended up that by the time the case is trial, the defendant already served their prison term in full. This might be okay, although it's not ideal, with the guilty verdict, but it would be incredibly unjust for those given a not guilty verdict at the end of the trial. Why I say this not ideal even with a guilty verdict, because even with a guilty verdict, a person could only serve 50% of their prison term before they are being released. And here you're talking about somebody sitting for the full term of the prison term. It also affects the NIM decision, also affect the pleas. So somebody plead guilty, it's not necessarily they are guilty. It's also under the calculation of whether or not it's worth waiting for the NIM decision to go through, or should we just plead guilty so that's the case can proceed. So several Vietnamese defendants plead guilty because they want to be released early. And how does that work? An early guilty plea would earn them about a quarter or a third discount on their sentence. So most often they would need to serve 50% of the sentence before being released. So a 2-year sentence, for example, an early guilty plea could earn them about 13 months sentence. And then they would need to serve about 6.5 months before they are being released. So whether or not somebody would decide whether in the past year in particular, when COVID hit the system very hard and the NIM decision is taking a long time, I have seen that some of the defendants have been sitting in system, being in a custody nearly a year, hasn't been able to attend the trial yet. And that's when you see the conflict between defendant and barristers. Some barrister would advise that, well, I know that you're not guilty, but just go ahead and plead guilty so that you can be released. But the defendant would not agree, and vice versa. That's where the conflicts between the defendant and barrister. Now, the next issues I observe is interpreting, and it is when the privatization issues, privatization really across the massive issues here for the Vietnamese defendants in criminal justice system, because Vietnamese language is a rare language. So any cases are brought before the court or even within the police station and anything, they need an interpreter. But because of privatization issue, it costs a shortage of the interpreter, because a lot of people, interpreters just don't want to register with the agency that the government gave the contract to. So now it affects the availability and the quality of interpreter. So because the interpreter's shortage caused significant delay in the system, and sometimes, a lot of time, the Vietnamese defendants were produced in court, but there's no interpreter. So then they were sent back to the custody again to wait. The hearing or trial dates could all be changed or delayed if the MOJ's contractor failed to send an interpreter in. Some court or police station would take initiatives and source an interpreter on the National Register of Public Service Interpreter, the most prestigious body that's used to be able to just be there and then everybody can contact them. But because of privatization, many of the places can't contact them anymore. And in this sense, privatization really hurt the public sectors and negatively affect the Vietnamese defendants within the system. And interpreting quality through their contractor is really questionable. Wrong interpreting and translating costs someone a negative decision from the system, not to mention the infiltration of the criminal network through low quality interpreter in order to continue to control and intimidate these defendants, even when they are in the prison, just so those higher up in the chain won't be exposed. And this is a massive issue within the Vietnamese community. Some of the Vietnamese interpreters have been caught and has been trial for that, but we still don't know who's still out there. Yeah, so these cause further delay, and I just want to stress that COVID only adds further delays, but it's not the main cause of the delay, okay? The delay for trialing the Vietnamese cases has always been there in the system. The next bit is like resettlement, post-court or post-prison time. You can see that those with a positive NIM decision and or like acquitted from the court, from the case, would be proceeding with seeking asylum, and they might be successful, they might be not. But those with a negative NIM decision and are convicted would face either they deported, a small number of them are deported, but a larger of them are actually stuck in a circle. And here's what it looked like. So you see that they were handed to the Home Office. They might be bailed. They might be kept in the immigration holding center, are waiting to be removed, or those are being bailed will be asked to come in to sign in the police station or in a Home Office at about like once or twice a week, and then they just vanished and they're back into the criminal justice system again, because there's a criminal network out there ready to take these people in, or they just wait outside to take these people straight back into another cannabis farm, which is a very, very sad situation the Vietnamese is going through here. Thanks for having me. I just want to just put that last excerpt here from the one interview that I attended, just some food for the thoughts.
Thank you, Chung. Just wanted to allow a bit of time for people to read that. It's really powerful. And thank you for talking to us about the detail of what happens in the system. And I think that is really important. And as we were producing these materials, that was something we had to do too, because in order to give people information, you have to think about what actually happens in the system and how. I guess just a reflection now would be to say just how traumatizing the system itself is to people who are already traumatized by the experiences that they've had. Thank you. I'm going to ask Phil, who is our training manager now, to talk about what we've done. Thanks, Phil.
Okay, good morning, everyone. I hope that everyone is doing well. So what I'm going to do is just briefly explain to you about these processes, what we did and why we did it. So to make these resources, what we did is we initially had to do our research, had to do a literature review. We had to look at what information was most important. We also had to look at what resources were already available to make sure we didn't duplicate anything. Then, as you've heard, we gathered together a steering group of experts, and again, trying to prioritize what were the key issues that we wanted to address when we made these resources. To complement that, what we did is we undertook a youth consultation with ECPAT UK youth group members. So these were those under the age of 18 and a few young adults as well. And we asked about their experiences, what information was most important to you? And we really learned from them what they would have seen as most important. The final thing we had to do was actually think not just about the content, but how are we going to communicate this content? Okay, how do we do this in a child-friendly way? How do we do it for and focus it on adults? How do we make it most accessible for those already in migration. So that was the process and the thinking, and that's kind of how we made these resources. So the first thing to say is what we had to do, we had to make sure we avoided duplication. There are already resources out there giving information about trafficking that have been translated into Vietnamese. We did not want to do the same thing. So here are just a few of these resources. MyClue, they've got a who's who resource. And what this resource does is it explains what the different professionals and practitioners a young person would come across, what their role is and how they are there to help. Another one is previously ECPAT UK have created these child-friendly leaflets. And what these do is that they explain what trafficking and exploitation means. It explains a young person's rights and how they can help. ECPAT UK, we've also made we've made a couple of videos, and we made the Secret Gardeners. This was a video, again, translated into Vietnamese, about a young person's experience being trafficked. The IOM and Bernardo's have made these welcome leaflets for young people who are unaccompanied and come into care. And again, giving more information about safety, what is happening and the process there. And again, that has been translated into Vietnamese. And then the NSPCC have their child trafficking leaflet as well. Again, it focuses on rights, processes, and who can help. So what you can just see, just for those few resources, is that there are already resources there. So we wanted to make sure that we didn't duplicate, but instead we built upon that and enhanced it. Something to note about these resources is that they were mostly focused for children. And that's why in our resources, we wanted something focused towards adults as well as those under the age of 18. The second thing is we wanted to make it specific to trafficking from Vietnam. Okay, so the leaflets that I've talked about, or the resources I've talked about already, they were not specific and specifically targeting those in migration from Vietnam. So we decided to have a think and take this opportunity to maybe try and address a particular issue that is very prevalent amongst potential victims of trafficking from Vietnam. Thirdly, is that we needed to focus on rights. This came across really, really strongly in the youth consultation. What we were most struck by was just the absolute lack of information that our young people had when they first came into services. They didn't understand any of these terms, they didn't understand what was happening, and they did not understand their rights. So from that youth consultation, what we realized is that the resource really needs to focus on providing that information, not only about processes, but about a young person's rights. And then finally, we had to think about how to put all of this information in an accessible format. I think generally these kinds of resources are made in a PDF file. We've done that as well, but we've tried to make these in different formats as well. If we think about someone who is in migration to the UK or in the UK, they might not be able to easily access a computer which makes it easy to read a PDF format. So therefore, we needed to make resources that can be shared through social media, resources that are easy to read on a small screen. So what did we come up with? What we realized is when we were thinking about all the content, there was a huge amount of content that we wanted to be putting in. And that was conflicting with how we wanted to communicate the information, because we wanted to use a video. But if we want the video to be shared over social media, then there are limits on how long that video could be. Therefore, what we did is we have created 2 videos, one focused for children and one for adults. And what the video is it gives the key explanations of rights and processes. And then what it does is we see it as a gateway into that extra information. So the video is there to capture people, to give the key information. And then the hope is that once someone has watched that video, and if it's relevant for them, they will go on the further links and access all that additional information. So what we've made are these two resources which are complementary. The video will then link into our web pages or PDF file, which gives all this additional information for young people. These resources are going to live on two sets of websites, so to speak. So we have them on our ECPAT UK website. So professionals in the UK, if you ever feel like you need to use these resources and these resources would be useful for a young person, you know that you can access them through our website. And then you can show your young person or vulnerable adult the video that is there on our website. Similarly, these resources will also be sitting on the World Vision Vietnam website as well. So I think without further ado now, we're ready to actually see one of these resources. So you heard me say that we made two sets of resources, one focused at children and one at adults. And each of the videos has an English version and a Vietnamese version. Just because we had a look at who is joining this group, we think the majority of people would not understand Vietnamese. So we're just going to show the English version video that we created for children.
Young people who have migrated abroad to the UK may be vulnerable to exploitation. It can be hard to know who to trust, but you have the right to be safe and cared for. In the UK, it is against the law for anyone to take advantage of you. If anyone is making you steal or beg, sexually abusing you, or making you work for little or no pay, you may be a victim of trafficking. It doesn't matter if you know the person taking advantage of you, if you or your family agree to the situation, or if you have a debt to pay back. If somebody is taking advantage of you, threatening you or your family and making you feel scared, you have rights to protection. If this happens to you, you may come into contact with police. The police are there to help you if you are frightened, in trouble, or need help. While the police are investigating what has happened, they may take you into a police station, either under arrest or for your own protection. At the police station, they are responsible for your welfare and should ask about any health or other needs you have. When you are not being spoken to, you will probably be held in a police cell. You can ask to speak to an appropriate adult, a healthcare worker, or a member of custody staff if you need anything. If you have been arrested, the police will arrange a legal representative for you. This person can give you advice about what to say, and they can communicate with the police on your behalf. You also have the right to an interpreter to help you understand what is happening. You have rights, even if you are not a UK citizen and even if you are accused of crime. There are organisations that can help you free of charge and can speak to you in Vietnamese. Visit wvi.org.vn/publications.html to find out more.
Okay, and that was just one example of these resources. Thank you very much for listening. I'll hand back over to you, Patricia.
Thanks, Phil. I hope everyone, it's hard to say enjoyed, isn't it? Because it's about such a serious subject. But what we're hoping with that video is that it's interesting to people who need to get the information, basically. So that's, I guess that's why we're keen to, if anyone's got any feedback on it, it would be really, really helpful. Obviously, we'll be monitoring sort of take up of the video and access into our respective websites. All of the resources will be available, I think, of Vietnamese translation version of the PDFs is not currently live, but will be shortly. But all of the videos are live, so that's great. And we will, we've been recording this event as well. So we will be making that available, and also letting people, really publicising the information that's out there so you can access it. Phil, have I missed any practicalities that people need to be aware of?
No, I don't think so. What we're going to do is, after this event finishes, through the Eventbrite functionality, we'll be emailing the links so you know how to access all of these resources. What we'll also do is we will include links to those different resources which I explained are already in existence. So we'll share those links with you as well.
That's great, thank you. In terms of questions, I've had one which would be about any other languages that this may be available in. Currently we have no plans for that, but obviously if the resources are there, we can have them translated. Obviously we'd need, so if anyone wants to talk to us about that, that's absolutely welcome. So please do. I think I had a specific question about Mandarin. But yeah, I mean, and as Phil said up top, we wanted to make sure that it was the information that was the important thing. Obviously the targeting is to Vietnamese people, but the information itself is applicable to anybody really in that situation. Other questions have been about really big issues. I have to say, and I'm not sure in this session that we've got the time to go into huge issues around what we can do in terms of sort of working with the Vietnamese government and the UK government. I kind of feel like we can't. We've had a couple of questions related to that. I sort of, unless you want to jump in, Tuhar, I think we kind of I feel unqualified to answer that question, I have to say, but I don't know if anyone else has anything on that. It was just about cooperation. Obviously, this project was funded via the Home Office modern slavery funding. So there's that element to this project. Chung, did you want to come in? Or?
Yeah, can I just quickly jump in with the question about getting the Vietnamese government to work with this end?
Yes, please do.
My first recommendation is that we would need to get the Vietnamese government or official to accept the definition of human trafficking and modern slavery that we're using in this country, because at the moment is the mismatch between the two countries to define who's a victim of trafficking, who's a victim of modern slavery, and that sort of thing. So I'm sure that those two I'm not sure you were there in the IOM event. Patricia, you were there as well, wasn't it? And IOM Hanoi 2 years ago. And you see that the officer, one of the representatives of the Haiphong district public security person came, and he said, he shared with us that there's a funding from the government allocated to Haiphong province in order to assist the victim of human trafficking or modern slavery when they return to Vietnam. But at the end of the financial year, they have to return that fund back to the central government, because none of the people returned are qualified to be called victim because of the list that they do and what they classify victim and what not. So that's one thing that I think to start with, you just need to really work on that first, what we agree to call somebody a victim and what not. And it's another, Haiphong and Nghệ An are the two provinces that have the most Vietnamese people in the UK at the moment. And you see the Nghệ An province, the head of the public security in Nghệ An, when the Essex lorry tragedy happened, what he came out. He came out in the newspaper and he said immediately, none of them are victim. Nobody could be a victim to it. Nobody is paying that much money in order to be trafficked. That is his comment on the press at that time. So if you have that kind of mentality, then yeah, I don't think that we can work together to start with. At the moment, we need to get them to change that kind of mentality first.
Thank you. Patricia, did you want to come in?
Just to say that when we did the research as well, we found a number of people who had been returned to Vietnam who hadn't been identified in the UK. and were not identified when they returned to Vietnam. But we had a separate list of indicators based around the human trafficking definition that we used to speak to people. And I think, I can't remember exactly the statistic, but of the 21 people we spoke to, I think it was like 19 people had strong indicators of human trafficking, but hadn't been identified either in the UK or in Vietnam, which is very telling, I think.
Sorry, I did the classic. I was on mute. Thank you, Patricia. Other big questions raised here about the hostile environment here in the UK currently, and you know, kind of migration policy generally. One question about the resources themselves is about the how do they address the need to encourage young people to trust the police, while also acknowledging the response may be discriminatory and that they may need to complain, which is a brilliant question, and not just for young people, for everyone really, isn't it? And it's something that we did struggle with. So I'll hand over to you, Phil, to kind of say a bit more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was something that we have to juggle with, right? So we wanted to focus on rights and processes and how things should be done. But at the same time, we also wanted to make sure we captured some of the reality. So, you know, I think there we were balancing both, saying, you know, if you come into contact with police, they should be someone who's keeping you safe. You should be able to go to them for help. But then also trying to balance that with the reality and saying you might be arrested. And if that's the case, then these are your rights and this is who you should talk to. So on the further information that we go beyond the video, we talk about making sure that your rights are being realized and what organizations can help you if they're not. So really difficult thing to balance, really good question. I hope that gives you an idea there.
That's great, thanks, Phil. We've had quite a few queries about how we're going to kind of promote and kind of get the resources out there. World Vision Vietnam are going to be ensuring that the videos are available on Zalo app. I don't know if you want to say anything about that, Tuha, or?
Yes. So we are also really want to promote this product through Zalo and the national hotline official account that is reached with the Vietnamese people, not only in Vietnam, but also in some other countries. Because we know that Vietnamese people still keep Zalo as a favorite contact to their Vietnamese people in Vietnam. So this is one of the resources that we want will how do they spread the products to Vietnamese people, and we will also how to say disseminate the product through Facebook also, and we really want to make people aware of what are their rights in the UK and how they can contact to the available resources for support, especially the national hotline. Under this project, we are working with the national hotline to to develop the online counseling for the Vietnamese people, so that people abroad can have the consultation with the national hotline through Zalo official account. So we hope that Vietnamese people can have a prompt access to available resources even in Vietnam or in the UK.
That's great, thank you so much. I'm just going to come back to one more question for the panel, which was it's kind of around the well, the hostile environment, which I mentioned earlier, and how that plays a role really in sustaining a market. And the other side of that question was about any particular pull factors, which I know you talked about a little in your presentation, Patricia, but shall I come over to you first?
Yeah, no problem. Just to say about the hostile environment, I think you know, it's become more and more a hostile environment over the last few decades. What we had 3 decades ago is very different to what we have now. That's the first thing to say. But also with this hostile environment, I think it's the higher up you draw up this drawbridge, the more difficult and dangerous it will be for people to get around that. And people, you know, it won't be a case of people will automatically stop coming. The pull factor that's mentioned sometimes, I think is a little bit too simplistic. I think you have to look at the full and rounded picture. Just saying it's a pull or it's a push isn't enough. You've got to understand the complexity of it. And in terms of the hostile environment, well, I mean, it has this huge impact, but what I think one of the main things it does is it decreases the amount of trust people have in institutions and processes that they go through. And it also denies the ability of people to restore trust in those processes and institutions and you know, the police and authorities and et cetera, et cetera. And in terms of migration policy, I mean, globally, this is an issue too. And that came out when we looked at the structural factors involved in creation of vulnerability. Migration management was part of that story. So, you know, it's a bigger issue, but it's just, I think you have to look at everything in context, essentially.
Great, thank you for that. Did anyone else want to come in on that at all? I think we've had lots of questions about charities that can be referred to. Well, not lots, we've had a couple, but there is information in the literature that we've produced. Obviously, if anyone's aware of any others, then do shout. I mean, we really welcome feedback on what we've done and where we've got to, always looking to improve things. So please do shout once you've had all the resources. They'll all be emailed to you, as we've said, along with this recording. And yeah, I mean, obviously, we'll all stay in touch. We'll all keep talking about this issue. It's so important. And I think we've had some questions about Crown Prosecution Service, some questions about, you know, kind of the whole legal process. Obviously, I think we're all going to be talking more and more over the coming days and weeks as we see what plans government have for reform, which I know are alarming a number of us. The other thing to say is that we do have another event tomorrow, which is a longer event focused on kind of having a wider discussion. Really, it's focused for practitioners, people on the ground working with trafficked and exploited people, to just kind of find out a bit more, I suppose, and have a bit more of a conversation. And we're also going to be announcing our children's champion at that event as well. So something nice too. Phil, I'm going to ask you if there's anything I've missed, because there usually is. No. And for any final comments from anyone from the panel, I don't want to think that you're sitting on something burning that you wanted to say. No? That's great. Thank you, everybody, for your interest, for your participation. Sorry I couldn't see your lovely faces, but hopefully we'll all be doing these sorts of things at some point in the same place at some point in the future. But everyone, stay well, keep well, and thank you, and goodbye.